Dear friends, let us look at the restoration comedy of manners. Before looking at the restoration comedy of manners, let us consider the 17th century dramatic heritage. After Shakespeare in the early 17th century, the playwrights like Ben Jonson, Beaumont, and Fletcher were remarkable writers. Post-Shakespearean English drama was marked by Ben Jonson's plays. Ben Jonson, who was a contemporary of Shakespeare, tried to develop his own thoughts through his plays. Ben Jonson's comedies came to be called as comedies of humors. Ben Jonson focused on the basic elements of human nature, that is, the common problems which prevail in human body, basically related to health. The problems such as bile, plague, cough, etc., the cold that a person suffers, became the source of material to Ben Jonson. Ben Jonson used the idea of either the excess of cough or cold, or the weakness in a human being due to the plague or bile, etc., leading to the shortcoming in a person in the manner of short temper or excess of say, blood pressure, etc. As a result of these variations, human beings act differently. And Ben Jonson, in his plays like Every Man in His Humor, Every Man Out of His Humor, Walpole, The Alchemist, tried to create one or the other unique characters who suffer from eccentric nature in their life. That is why Ben Jonson called these plays as comedy of humors. Comedy of manners, restoration comedy of manners, is entirely different from Ben Jonson. The second half of 17th century, starting from 1660 with the restoration of theatres in England to the 18th century, 1780s or 90s, is generally a long period of restoration comedies. Restoration comedies of manners is a comedy that mocks at licentiousness, freedom that is enjoyed by the aristocratic class of England. The aristocratic class of England actually spent its time in coffee houses, clubs, or drawing rooms. Drawing rooms, coffee houses, or clubs are the common places for the aristocratic rich class of England. Restoration comedy of manners entirely neglected the lower class or poor people of England. It concentrated only on the high class of the society or aristocratic class. The aristocratic class of young men and women which gathered in coffee houses, clubs, or drawing rooms generally thought of spoiling the relationship. The love affairs or intrigues, jealousies, sexual intrigues, and immorality became the common subject matter of restoration comedy of manners. The playwrights like William Congreve, Wycherley, Parker, Van Dyck focused on the ironical lifestyle of the upper class of England. William Congreve's Way of the World is considered as the masterpiece of comedy of manners. In the late 17th century and in the early 18th century, the four playwrights, William Congreve, William Wycherley, Van Dyck, and Parker, succeeded in holding the attention of the audience who came to theatres to watch these restoration comedies of manners. The great playwright like William Congreve succeeded in reading pulse of the common people. Common people who came to theatre enjoyed this ironical love affairs or intrigues and hypocrisy of the upper class of England. In the 18th century, it was Richard Brinsley Sheridan who was another great successor of Restoration comedy of manners. Sheridan's rivals and school for scandal became very famous plays in satirizing the hypocrisy of English society. The playwright like Sheridan could think of criticizing such a aristocratic lifestyle where the great women of upper class can train the youngsters how to spoil the dignified life of others, spoiling the love or affection and the relationship and destroying the characters of the surrounding people became the central agenda of the upper class. Sheridan, in his play like School for Scandal, creates such a situation where a woman like Lady Sneerwell, who was jilted, frustrated, could open a school for scandalizing the dignified lives of the people. This is where we see the licentiousness, immorality, and the degraded lifestyle of people. All the events took place in coffee houses, clubs, or drawing rooms. Generally, 18th century came to be called as a drawing room culture, as it focused only on the upper class, aristocratic, or the wealthy people, and rich young men and women coming to clubs and behaving licentiously. The plays came to be called as the upper class satirical picture of the days and age. The Restoration comedy of manners that ruled English society and theatre for more than a century came to experience decline during 1780s. Only two great playwrights like Sheridan and Goldsmith succeeded in carrying out the Restoration comedy of manners tradition that was developed by William Congreve and others in the late 17th century. William Goldsmith, through his play like She Stoops to Conquer, tried to satirize what Sheridan did through his School for Scandal or Rivals. In total, Restoration comedy of manners tries to suggest how the period that was called as Commonwealth or Oliver Cromwell's period or Stuart period in England, which gave way to licentiousness through the restoration of theatre, leading to 1780s when playwrights like Goldsmith and Sheridan could achieve in highlighting, in portraying the same manner that they portrayed. And in general, Restoration comedy of manners is a picture of total licentiousness, immorality, waywardness, carelessness, and excess of freedom that spoiled the aristocratic upper class society of England. Restoration comedy of manners is a long period in history of English literature, passing from mid 17th century to the last quarter of 18th century. Queen Anne's period, that is generally a title to 18th century, but the restoration comedy of manners is what actually swept away more than 100 years of period, portraying this total love affair or ugliness and the silly attitude basically intended to spoil and destroy the good virtuous life of others. This is what we generally mean by restoration comedy of manners. It satirizes the manners, ways, behaviors, and the hypocrisy of 18th century England. Thank you.